Imagine receiving a letter from your neighbor telling you never to come near their home again. Not because they hate you, but because they love you enough to die for you. That is not a metaphor. That is exactly what happened in a small English village in 1665. And for over 300 years, the full weight of what those people chose has been quietly sitting in the stone walls of a place most of the world has never heard of. In the autumn of 1665, a tailor's assistant in the village of Eyams, in Derbyshire, England, opened a bundle of cloth sent from London. Within days, he was dead. Within weeks, his neighbors were dying. The Black Death had arrived. And what happened next was one of the most extraordinary acts of collective sacrifice in human history. Eyams was a village of roughly 350 souls, nestled in the Peak District hills. When the plague arrived, the instinct of every living person should have been to run, flee into the countryside, scatter, survive. That is what villages across England were doing. That is what any rational human being would do when death begins knocking on doors one by one. But Eyams did not run. Led by their rector, William Mompesson, and the former minister, Thomas Stanley, the villagers made a decision that defies easy explanation even today. They voted, collectively, to seal themselves inside the village boundaries. They would not leave. They would not let the plague escape into the surrounding countryside. They chose to become a living wall between the infection and the rest of England. Think about what that actually meant. It meant watching your children develop swollen, blackened lumps beneath their skin and knowing no help was coming. It meant burying your own husband in the garden because the churchyard was too dangerous for a gathering. It meant waking up every morning uncertain whether you would see the sunset. And it meant choosing that over and over again every single day for 14 months. If you find this story as extraordinary as I do, take a second right now to hit the like button and subscribe. There are stories buried in history that deserve to be told loudly, and this channel exists to find every single one of them. The quarantine system they designed was remarkable in its practicality. The village established boundary stones, some of which still exist today, where outside suppliers would leave food and supplies. Payment was left in holes carved into the stone, filled with vinegar water, believed at the time to neutralize contagion. The villagers never crossed those lines. Neighboring towns, particularly Sheffield and Bakewell, honored the agreement and kept their distance. William Mompesson wrote letters during this period that survive today. In one of them, he described the village as a place of sorrow and silence. He watched his own congregation dwindle week by week. He eventually sent his 2 children away before the quarantine fully sealed, a decision that must have torn him apart, but he stayed. His wife Catherine stayed with him. She would die of the plague in August of 1666. By the time the plague finally burned itself out in the autumn of 1666, 260 people out of a population of roughly 350 had died. That is nearly 3/4 of the entire village. Entire families were wiped out. The gravedigger, Marshall Howe, buried so many neighbors that he reportedly became immune to the disease and outlived almost everyone he knew. One woman named Elizabeth Hancock buried 6 of her children and her husband within 8 days. She dug the graves herself in the fields near her farm because there was no one left to help her. She survived. We do not know how she kept going. We simply know that she did. The most famous story from Eyams is that of the Riley family graves, which still stand in an open field outside the village. You can visit them today. 6 simple stones in a row, marking the children Elizabeth buried with her own hands. Standing in that field on a gray English afternoon, the reality of what happened there becomes almost unbearable. What is remarkable, and what historians still debate, is the moral architecture of this decision. These were not soldiers ordered into battle. There was no king commanding them to stay. There was a rector with persuasive faith, and there were ordinary people, farmers, miners, women, children, who looked at the situation and chose community over survival. Did every person truly consent? Did fear of God or social pressure play a role? Probably. Human decisions are never purely clean, but the outcome is undeniable. The plague did not spread beyond Eyams. The surrounding communities were spared. Sheffield survived, the Peak District survived, and 350 ordinary people paid for that survival with most of their lives. There is a church in Eyam today where Mompesson preached his outdoor sermons during the plague, holding services in the open air to reduce the spread between congregation members. The churchyard still holds graves marked with that terrible year. The village runs a plague commemoration every year on the last Sunday of August, a ceremony that has been observed for centuries. Eyam is sometimes called the Plague Village, but that name does not quite capture it. It was not simply a village where plague happened. It was a village where people happened to plague. They confronted it, organized against it, and chose the shape of their own fate, with a clarity that should make every one of us stop and ask what we would have done. We live in a world that constantly debates sacrifice, community, and individual freedom. We argue about what we owe each other. The people of Eyam in 1665, with no vaccines, no antibiotics, no modern medicine, and no certainty that their sacrifice would even work, answered that question in the only way that truly counts. They answered it with their lives. If this story moved you the way it moved me, please subscribe to this channel and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. History is not just dates and kings. It is people making impossible choices in terrible moments. And some of those choices deserve to be remembered forever. Eyam deserves to be remembered forever.